welcome you to the class, Bible study class that I'm leading. This month, in August 2025, we're talking about prophecy and prophets. If you didn't get a handout, there's still a couple up here. You didn't have as many copies made as previously, so you may have to share.
Heck is up.
All right.
Punch.
And there is not punch, it is watermelon gazpacho, courtesy of Kathy. So cups and flat bowls are behind the bowl. Let's jump into it. So your handout just kind of gives you an outline of what I'm going to cover, so if I forget, you can remind me what I was supposed to cover. The idea here is we're going to talk about the biblical prophets mostly, but I'm going to situate them in their cultural context. And we're going to talk about how they operated, who they were, what we know about them, the kinds of things that did they prophesy about, and what kind of significance does that have for us today. Who were the prophets? I'm focusing on the Hebrew prophets because this is a Bible study class, but you need to understand that they didn't just pop out of nowhere and exist separate from the other cultures around them in West Asia, the parts of the world that are now Syria, Iraq, and Jordan, Lebanon, those places. Let's focus on who is called a prophet. There are three major prophets that have their own books in the Bible: Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And there are at least a dozen minor prophets. There are a dozen minor prophets that have their own book, 13 if you count Daniel. And the prophet section of the Bible is one of the three sections in the Hebrew Scriptures. So the Hebrew Scriptures are more or less the Old Testament of Protestants and Catholics. I say more or less because there's some give around the edges. I mean, there are a lot of books that are in everybody's list. They're canon, C-A-N-O-N. Canon with one N in the middle is a rule, a list. Canon with two N's in the middle is the thing that shoots gunpowder and bullet and big shells. So the Jewish canon is more or less the Hebrew Bible is more or less the Old Testament. And it's divided into three sections: the Pentateuch, which is the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the writings. So we're talking here about the middle section. Come on in. Hey, Faye.
Excuse me, that would get some kind of...
You come over here and get some watermelon gazpacho, too.
Oh my goodness. Thank you guys. I'm sorry I'm late.
That's fine. So you 5 points off your grade.
Okay, thank you.
So to confuse matters further, the Hebrew Bible also refers to a group called the former prophets, where the latter prophets are the three I named, the three big ones: Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. And then the former prophets are stories about different people in the narrative books, the books that we call Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. So there are a lot of prophets in there, and the list of prophets is a little bit squishy. The Hebrew tradition, the rabbinic tradition, is that there were 48 prophets and 7 prophetesses. But they include a lot of people who don't really prophesy, and so I'm not sure whether that's just an honorific or why they are considered prophets. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, not really a prophet, he was more a lawgiver. Aaron, who was the priest, served alongside Moses. Samuel, who was clearly a prophet because he selected the first king of Israel. King David, Elijah, who's a lot of stories about his actions, and Deborah, one of the judges. There are a lot of people that are categorized as prophets. And in Islam, all of these religious figures are called prophets. Jesus is called a prophet. Muhammad is the last of the prophets. But the whole prophet is just more like an honorific.
Martin,
yeah.
Did a prophet know he was a prophet, or do we just give them that after they've prophesied?
Wow, that's a great question. I think some of these people are considered prophets that wouldn't have considered themselves prophets. I mean, I don't think Abraham, to the extent that there's any historical figure that story is based on, would have considered himself a prophet. He was a patriarch, clearly a patriarch. And there are a lot of stories about him that circulated, but they don't have anything to do with him predicting the future. It was more like he was given a prophecy by God. God told him, "You will be the father of a large nation," and God told him that your son, you will have a son in your old age, and all that came true. But it wasn't like Abraham then preached that to somebody else. Like I said, the term prophet is a little bit squishy. But I'm going to give you an example of, is this prophecy or is this not prophecy? So everybody remembers King Saul, bad King Saul, who was king before David. Samuel anointed Saul and made him king of Israel. And at that time, that was the entire, if you look at the map on the back of your handout, that was both Israel and Judah, according to the myths. There's no archaeological evidence to suggest that King Saul ever existed, much less that he ruled over that whole area, but there are a lot of stories about it. And this is one of them. This is in 1 Samuel 10, verses 10 to 13. When they were going from there to Gibron, a band of prophets met them, and the Spirit of God possessed him, meaning Saul, and he fell into a prophetic frenzy along with them. When all who knew him before saw how he prophesied with the prophets, the people said to one another, "What has come over the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?" A man of the place answered, "And who is their father?" Therefore it became a proverb, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" When his prophetic frenzy had ended, he went home. So what the heck is a prophetic frenzy? There's really no explanation of it. I mean, I guess it's what it describes. You had a fit. You were like a person who was possessed or in the midst of a mental health crisis. But I love this line in the middle where this, like, the guy who's just standing over there, the comic relief, the bystander says, "A man of the place answered, and who is their father?" I think a better translation would be, "Who's your daddy?" Because it is a sarcastic question, and who is their father? It doesn't capture the sarcasm that I think is necessary for that particular thing, because you see this guy, he's not quite king yet at this point in the story, but he's about to go and be anointed king, and he's clearly an important dude, and he's having a prophetic frenzy because he sees a band of prophets that is going around prophesying, and feels like he's going to take part in that. So that gives you kind of a little bit of the flavor of the thing. It was a little bit chaotic. There certainly was nobody saying, "All right, here's your license to prophesy." There's no central authority involved in this. It's just, if you feel called to prophesy, you go and prophesy, and if you have a band of prophets with you, then you go with them. Yeah.
Didn't the American Indians have this ritual where they would go out and have they go out by themselves and have sort of a...
Yeah, they're all around the world. There are different traditions where people engage in meditation, prayer, fasting. Very important, and they get really out of their minds and have a...
It reminded me of a prophetic frenzy.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
I think the Greek oracles used to do the same thing, use some drugs.
Right. The Oracle of Delphi, there was a crack in the ground, a crack in the rock, and there was gases that were coming up out of that crack in the rock and caused people to hallucinate.
I've heard the same thing about the Oracle of Bull Run Mountain.
Yeah. He's not here to defend himself, but we won't bring that up. Then that wasn't the only time that Saul did this. Another time, after he'd become king, he stripped off his clothes and lay naked all that day and all that night. Therefore it is said, "Is Saul also amongst the prophets?" And nowadays you would get a temporary restraining order. Am I right, Rita? All right. She knows about temporary restraining orders. All right.
Did you do it?
So like I'm saying, there's a lot of different roles that were played in ancient West Asia. that were covered by the prophet. A prophet might be a professional supported by a king or a temple, or even be a member of a priestly family. Ezekiel was an example of somebody who was a member of the priestly family. Prophet could be an outsider like Jeremiah. Gets into some trouble, we'll talk about it. And they might give oracles about military matters or political events. We'll talk about that a little bit, because as the Assyrians and the Babylonians were breathing down the necks of the Israelites and the Judahites, there was a lot of prophesying about what was going to happen, and some of it was true and some of it was not, because people prophesied all sorts of things depending on what their audience wanted to hear. Prophets also commentated about the current society and were social critics, and so that tradition, when you hear people refer to Jesus as a prophet, you see that makes a lot of sense, because he engaged in a social critique as well. But you get that in Amos. What does God demand of you? You get that a lot in Isaiah, as a matter of fact, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And then there's also a category of prophecy called an apocalypse or a revelation. And this is supposed to be an unveiling of what is going to happen in the future, or what is happening in heaven. And the idea there is that the prophet goes on a journey, a vision, and some angel tells him what he's observing. So the book of Revelation in the New Testament is an example of that. It's supposed to be an explanation of the end times, and there are other books in the Bible and elsewhere that talk about that. So,
Martin?
yeah.
They're metaphysical prophecies anticipating the end of time. If somebody had the power to see the future, the first question I'd ask is, what stock should I buy? and it strikes me that they're not talking about future crop success or what to plant. The fundamental basic things related to day-to-day life are missing from their prophecy, and they're only talking about stuff that can't be validated until after their death.
Yeah. No, that's the best kind of prophecy. Is that, you make your money now, and then after you die, somebody determines whether it was accurate or not.
Joseph.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's plenty of examples of stories told about people who prophesied, and the prophecies came true in some fashion. Joseph's dreams, for example, I think you're thinking about, where he sees the 7 fat cows and the 7 thin cows, and 7 thin cows eat up the 7 fat cows. All that stuff. Yeah, there are certainly stories about prophecies that came true within people's lifetimes, but the real money is, I think you're right, in prophesying things that are non-verifiable, until it's too late. And so then the question becomes, what motivates people to do that? And sometimes it's just a revenge fantasy, and sometimes it's more of, maybe more of a scam. I don't know. I mean, clearly the people. I keep coming to Harold Camping because he's just a terrible example, only a good example, of prophesying a specific date for the second coming and then having to put it off again. But he's hardly the only one. He's not even the only one in the 20th century. And so, you've got prophets. And there's a rule for telling whether prophets were real prophets or false prophets. It's found in the book of Deuteronomy, and it goes as follows, quote, "If a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, but the thing does not take place or prove true, it is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Do not be frightened by it." Seems like good advice. Be skeptical about these prophecies. The Bible itself is saying, don't take somebody's word for it. Let's see what comes of it and see if it proves to be true. And we've talked a little bit about dreams. Joseph had dreams. Daniel had dreams. The book of Daniel has some dreams, some visions that he had when he was in a trance. So there's various ways that these prophecies came to them. And then there's common tropes. There were common themes, common ideas that a lot of prophets shared. One of the common tropes amongst the Old Testament prophets was comparing Israel and Judah's idolatry and their alliance with foreign powers to an unfaithful wife. And in this trope, this allegory, metaphor, God is the husband, and the kingdom of Israel and kingdom of Judah are like his wife. And so the prophets get really dirty with this sometimes. I mean, I'm not going to read the Bible to you because it's too dirty for even a grown-up adult ed class. I will give you the synopsis here. This is from Ezekiel. He has this extended allegory of the capital of Israel and the capital of Judah as prostitutes. And he's talking about one of them. Yet she increased her prostitutions, remembering the days of her youth, when she prostituted herself in the land of Egypt and lusted after her paramours there. And this is the part I'm skipping over, where he compares her lovers to animals, particularly noteworthy animals. Thus you long for the lewdness of your youth when the Egyptians fondled your bosom and caressed your young breasts. I mean, this is graphic stuff in the Bible. I mean, this is one of those passages that you go, oh, this never gets taught in adult Bible class, and for good reason. But you know, it's not innocent. It is extremely misogynistic, just because he's denigrating all women with this kind of prostitution and allegory. But he makes the disgust very obvious, because he said in the next passage, "For thus says the Lord God, I will deliver you into the hands of those whom you hate, into the hands of those from whom you turn in disgust, and they shall deal with you in hatred, and take away all the fruit of your labor, and leave you naked and bare, and the nakedness of your prostitutions shall be exposed. Your lewdness and your prostitutions have brought this upon you, because you prostituted yourself with the nations, and polluted yourself with their idols." Wow. Just
Judgmental.
a little, yeah, kind of anti-sex, not sex positive. And there's similar passages in Jeremiah and Hosea, because this concept of the kingdom of Judah or kingdom of Israel as the unfaithful wife kind of pervades the Old Testament prophets, and they all seem to be a perennial hit. But that wasn't the only thing that prophets did. Sometimes they did magic tricks. You may remember that Moses had his staff that turned into a snake and then it turned back. I mean, that was a good one. But here's a trick that Elisha did. Elisha is one of the lesser known prophets, except for this one story. He was the successor to Elijah. Elijah was taken up in the whirlwind into heaven, and Elisha inherited his mantle, which then became the symbol of his authority, his prophetic authority. And that's where we get the expression to take the mantle from, or to inherit the mantle from Elisha. And Elisha's traveling. He went up there from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go away, bald head! Go away, bald head!" When he turned around and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 she-bears came out from the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. From there he went on to Mount Carmel and then returned to Samaria. So don't go around calling prophets old baldy. I mean, apparently that's a capital offense. I mean, this couldn't, yeah, it's crazy stuff. All right, so that's a little bit about what prophets do. Let's go on to when were the prophets active. So the Ur prophet, the real original OG prophet was Zarathustra, Zoroaster, who founded a religion that is still practiced today in Persia, Iran, Zoroastrianism. He probably lived in the late 2nd millennium or early 1st millennium, say sometime between 1200 and 900 BCE. Don't know. There are a lot of traditions that put him much later. Could have been much earlier. A lot of Persian history is obscure because they didn't keep as good records as some other people did. But Zoroaster set the model for later prophets, and so including the Israelite prophets. Some of the prophets are really difficult to date, the Israelite prophets, but we do have some approximate ideas for some of them, ranging from sometime in the 850s maybe to as late as the late 500s BCE. So a period of time, but some of these, the estimated range of scholars as to when these people were active could be a 400-year range. Obadiah, he could have been 850 BCE. could have been as late as 450 BCE.
And Martin, for reference, what was Abraham's time?
Abraham, well, that's very difficult. I have a book, a Bible study from a religious organization, an evangelical organization that gives pretty precise dates for Abraham, but the basis for that is very sketchy. You know, if you try to count the generations in the Bible, you run into immediate difficulty, so you kind of have to gloss over them. You know, if you know, and then you have the problem of when was the Exodus, and that doesn't fit into Egyptian history, which is very well documented at all. So clearly a couple generations before the Exodus, but since we don't know when the Exodus was, who the heck knows? But call it 1100 BCE. I mean, just as a point, you know, as an anchor point to stick it in there, sometime back then. So you know, this was. But again, you know, I'm somebody who believes that King Arthur was a real person who can be dated as a Romano-British war leader sometime in the 4th or 5th century AD, and that's a fringe opinion. But I don't think that Abraham was one real person. I think there were real people that stories were told about, and then they gathered together and kind of combined. But I don't think there was somebody named Abraham who did most of the things that are attributed to the biblical patriarch Abraham.
Yeah, I was just asking, in terms of sort of benchmarking, when did the whole Jewish religion start?
Oh, that's a great
And
question.
then when did the prophets appear after that? So it basically looks like it's 300, 400, 500 years after.
So there's, let me address that a couple different ways. The word Judaism wasn't coined until after Christianity arose. It was a way of distinguishing between the Jews and the Christians, because before that there was no terminology to really distinguish between them. So that's AD. The Jewish religion is basically Canaanite religion. Canaanites were living in the land of Canaan, which is Judah and Israel, for a very long period of time. And some of them started to consider themselves to be different. But you don't get any kind of worship of a sole deity until very late in the history of the kingdom of Judah. You get you get the kings who cast out the idols, and according to the Bible. But even at that point, there was still a lot of idol worship going on. In fact, God Yahweh, the Lord God of the Bible, had idols to him all over the place. When archaeologists have found some of them, so there was no clear distinction between the Judahites and their neighboring peoples until much later, really after the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians conquered Jerusalem in 597. 597. They abducted the Judahite elite, took them back to Babylon, but left a lot of people there. Then the Babylonians came back 11 years later, destroyed the temple, scattered all the people, and at that point, the people who were dragged off into exile in Babylon started to develop their religion as well. What do we do now? We're not in the land that the Lord ruled. How can we worship the Lord in a foreign land? According to the Psalms, that's the line in the Psalms. So what they did was they started to develop their thought patterns, and then when they came back 70 years later and rebuilt the temple, they imposed that new religion in the name of the old. They said this is a continuation of what our practices were before under the first temple, when they built the second temple, but really they were making a new religion, and so there was a lot of conflict over that. So anyway, that's remember that the timeline here, we covered the timeline in a previous class. The legendary timeline includes people like Abraham. The historical timeline includes people like Ezekiel and Jeremiah, the later kings of Judah, even some of the kings of Israel, But the real impact, the real story that is at the center of Judaism today, and from the point of the Babylonian captivity, was the Babylonian captivity. That's the big deal. So, yeah, that was 597 BCE. The abduction. 586 was the destruction of the temple, and 539 is when the Persians conquered Babylon and let people return. So you got these prophets. I've been talking about how they did things orally. They spoke to the people. They spoke to kings. They gave oracles. But how do people remember their words and actions today? So there were a lot of these stories, but that circulated in oral tradition. A lot of stories still circulate in oral tradition. Even in an internet age, we still have things that I heard from a friend of a friend. But those stories eventually got written down for the important stories of the prophets. They resonated with people in the Babylonian captivity and afterwards, because there was no longer an independent Judahite king. There would be an independent Judahite king when the Maccabees took over in the 3rd century BCE, but that only lasted 100 years. And then 2nd century, because then the Romans came in and took over the whole area. So there were followers. These prophets, the major prophets in particular, had followers who would write down their stuff, and then they would add to it. So the book of Isaiah, for example, scholars divide into 3 sections. You won't see this in the Bible. But they call them 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Isaiah, because the first Isaiah, most of that book, the first few chapters of Isaiah, go back to a historical figure that was named Isaiah. But his followers added things to them. It's sort of like when a painting is done by a master, a medieval or Renaissance master, his students would fill in some of the details, paint the parts that he didn't want to paint, and that sort of thing. And then, they kind of picked up his tricks, and they would do other paintings that would, appear later on and be attributed to the great master. The same thing happens with written text. Followers would write things down, and it's like, well, that's something he would have said. We need, what's that?
That makes it a slippery slope.
It does, because you got things that somebody wrote down at the time. I mean, shorthand hadn't been invented yet, so you already got the problem of transcribing something somebody's saying. You got then things that were remembered fairly close in time to the time they were said, and then you got things that were remembered decades later, and then you got things that were transmitted orally from generation to generation, and finally written down by somebody who never met the great man himself. We've talked. Yeah.
Are the prophets equivalent to influencers today in terms of they didn't actually work for a living, they just received donations from people? How do you pull off the job of being a prophet?
Well, that's a great question. I think they did probably just survive on donations, because now Isaiah bought a field, but I don't think he was actually planning to farm it himself. He was buying a field as a symbolic act to say Israel will be restored. It's okay to go ahead and have ordinary life go on, even though the Babylonians are about to conquer us. I don't know of any stories about any of the prophets actually having an honest job.
For-profit prophets.
Yeah, that's right.
So none of them were carpenters.
No carpenters that we know of.
Hey, Martin?
Yeah.
No female prophets?
There were some female prophets, 7 according to rabbinic tradition.
Only 7.
Only 7 included Deborah. Yeah, there's some important female figures in the Bible. There's 2 books in the Protestant Bible that were named after women, 2 more in the Apocrypha that are named after women. So there wasn't as misogynistic as it could have been, but it was plenty misogynistic, and I don't want you to ever forget that.
Be grateful for what you got.
That's right. So let me talk a little bit. I've mentioned one symbolic act that Isaiah did, which was buying the field. Let me talk about some of the other symbolic acts that the prophets engaged in. Jeremiah wore a yoke. A yoke is a wooden device that you put on oxen's neck. You have two oxen that you yoke together with the yoke. The yoke is a big, heavy piece of wood. It's got some straps, leather, rope, maybe, and you know. So when the ox moves forward, it presses against his chest or his neck, and it pulls the plow. So Jeremiah wore a yoke for some period of time, and it wasn't a fashion statement. He was signifying, this was in the period of time before Babylon had conquered Jerusalem, and he was signifying, you're under the Babylonian yoke, and that's okay.
The
Just-
yoke's on you.
Yoke's on you. Yes, that's right. And so, yeah.
You're excused.
So let me, while I'm talking about the yoke, I've got a story here.
Wait, were you going to say that symbolized that Israel at that time, or the Jewish kingdom at that time, was under
Babylonian rule. Basically, they were.
but it was okay.
But it was okay. Jeremiah was saying, get used to that. Don't listen to those other prophets who are saying we ought to rebel against the Babylonians. No good can come of that. And he was right. But this is an example of the great French phrase, esprit des escaliers, which means the spirit of the staircase. When somebody says something to you, and you can't think of a comeback until you're walking down the stairs out of the building, that's the esprit des escaliers. And Jeremiah had a great one because he's wearing this yoke, right? And this other prophet named Hananiah and comes up, and because he's prophesying that Babylon is going to be defeated. Hananiah is saying God will break the yoke of the king of Babylon, and then Jeremiah's there with his yoke, and Jeremiah tells Hananiah off. He says, you're full of it. And so Hananiah took the yoke from the neck of the prophet Jeremiah and broke it. And Jeremiah had nothing to say, basically, at that point, and left. And the Bible recounts sometime later, and I'm imagining this is like weeks of him sitting down and stewing over this whole thing. I should have said this. I should have said that. He comes up with a comeback and sends a messenger to say, go tell Hananiah, thus says the Lord, you have broken wooden bars only to forge iron bars in place of them. It's not a bad comeback, but it would have been better if he'd said it right away. All right. Jeremiah is wearing a yoke. Isaiah went naked for 3 years. And in ancient West Asia, you just didn't go naked. It was shameful. It was shocking. It's the sort of thing that slaves might have done to them as punishment, but it was not something a free person would do. So why would Isaiah go naked for 3 years? I mean, mind you, he wasn't wearing much before that. He was basically wearing a hair shirt wrapped around his body like a loincloth. But then he took that off and went naked for 3 years. Any ideas? Anybody want to guess? Sunburn. Yeah, he's going to have a hell of a sunburn.
Probably didn't live long enough to get skin cancer.
No, probably not. No, that was another symbolic act. He was symbolizing that the Egyptians, he was prophesying that the Egyptians would not come to the rescue of the Israelites, the Judahites, and instead the Babylonians would defeat Egypt and take the Egyptians into captivity as slaves. And as slaves, they would be forced to march naked. And so that was a symbolic act that he was taking part in. And, seems a little crazy. TRO time, I think, if you went naked for 3 years, people would not take that well today. Another symbolic act, Hosea, the prophet of Israel, married a prostitute and gave his kids symbolic names. My favorite was the one that translated as, not my people.
Oh, gee.
That would be hard to explain in school. What's your name? Not my people. I'm sorry, that's just a little bit odd. But obviously, it goes back to the trope that I was talking about, where God is the faithful husband and Israel is the faithless wife. So that was a little bit on the nose for that one. And then Ezekiel did a symbolic act. He ate a scroll. Ate a scroll. So that's not something that anybody did. I mean, there's a passage in the book of Revelation where there's a scroll that's given to someone to eat. But God tells Ezekiel to eat this scroll, and the scroll had words of lamentation and mourning and woe. There's that woe word again. But it tasted sweet in Ezekiel's mouth. Now, I looked for some commentary on what the heck this means. Your guess is as good as mine. I think that the closest I can come to it is saying that the Israelites are going to have a lot of woe, but they deserve it. And God is justified in punishing the Judahites and Israelites. Anyway, so that's how the stories were transmitted. Now, in their time, do you think people just kind of blindly believed what the prophet said? Just said, oh yeah, he's a prophet, and the other guy's a prophet, and he's saying the opposite thing, but they must both be right? No, they were very deeply skeptical. And there's a story from Ezekiel that kind of illustrates this fact. Ezekiel 12. The word of the Lord came to me. Mortal, what is this proverb of yours about the land of Israel that says, the days are prolonged, and every vision comes to nothing? Tell them therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will put an end to that proverb, and they shall use it no more as a proverb in Israel. But say to them, the days are near, and the fulfillment of every vision. For there shall no longer be any false vision or flattering divination within the house of Israel. But I, the Lord, will speak the word that I speak, and it will be fulfilled. It will no longer be delayed. But in your days, O rebellious house, I will speak the word and fulfill it, says the Lord God. Two things about that. One is, clearly, there was a backtalk by the people against the prophets to say, you keep saying these things, they haven't come to pass. When are they going to come to pass? And if the prophet said, well, they've been delayed, it's like, yeah, right. Pull the other one that's got bells on. And so there was obviously a lot of pushback about the prophecies. The other thing I want to say about that is when people say that prophecies from 6th century, 8th century BCE are about 21st century America, read in that passage, because it says right here, it was in those days. He was not prophesying. Ezekiel was not prophesying about 2025. He was prophesying about the 6th century BCE. So anyway,
Are these guys creating supporters who fight with each other? I mean, I'm trying to figure out that they must have had enough allies to give them enough resources so that they could spend their day prophesying.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking they've got allies that are probably not as fond of Jeremiah with his yoke on.
Yeah.
And yet we don't hear a lot of warfare conflict between these allies.
Well, Hananiah did break Jeremiah's yoke.
Right, but we don't have internal civil war between these different advocates of different prophets.
No, we don't.
So they're talking about the future
Well,
life.
but
and
we
you
don't
can't
know
fight
about any. But I mean, for example, Ezekiel's name only appears in the book of Ezekiel. There's nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible that anybody says anything about Ezekiel. So there could have been a lot of stuff that went on that just wasn't recorded for whatever reason. And so we don't know. There's another passage here from Ezekiel that's on the same theme. The word of the Lord came to me, mortal. The house of Israel is saying the vision that he sees is for many years ahead. He prophesies for distant times. He prophesies for distant times. That was harder to read than it should have been. Therefore say to them, thus says the Lord God, none of my words will be delayed any longer, but the word that I speak will be fulfilled, says the Lord God. Again, prophecies were for that date and time and place. It was not for distant times. And so, okay, you asked about conflict between prophets. Jeremiah speaks to that. He says, do not listen to the words of the prophets who are saying to you, you shall not serve the king of Babylon, for they are prophesying a lie to you. I have not sent them, says the Lord, but they are prophesying falsely in my name, with the result that I will drive you out and you will perish, you and the prophets who are prophesying to you. So, there was clearly in a time when Babylon is beating at the gates of Jerusalem, and there's a bunch of prophets that are saying, don't worry about that king, the Babylonians are going to die, they're going to go away, just like the Assyrians did when they tried to besiege Jerusalem. A plague came and attacked their camp, and they all had to leave. The same thing's going to happen to the Babylonians. Don't you worry about a thing, king. And then the king is taken captive. His sons are executed in front of him. The king is blinded, and he led off into slavery in the court of King Babylon. So that's how that prophecy ended. Yeah. So now a lot of this, of course, kind of is about people who lived a long time ago and didn't have a whole lot in common with us. But the early Christians really scoured the Bible for these prophecies and tried to figure out what they meant to them. So a large part of what prophecies mean in modern times is because of the Christian adaptation of those prophecies. So the gospel attributed to Matthew is a good example where the author goes and says, this happened in order to fulfill the prophecy. This happened in order to fulfill the prophecy. Over and over again, things happen to fulfill the prophecy. And some of them are prophecies about that time and place, but some of them are a little bit more vague. But you basically have to treat the prophets as basically cryptic and not about what they appear to be on their face, but about something else in order to interpret this way. And there are certain strains of Judaism that had the similar kind of interpretation. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran community had a lot of that, where they would scour the prophets for that kind of thing. And the classic example is from Isaiah 9:6, which you hear read in Christmas Eve services. For a child has been born to us, a son given to us, authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Well, that sounds like, could be Jesus. But if the very next verse, Isaiah 9:7, says, great will be his authority, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Well, what happened to the house of David, the throne of David and his kingdom, right after Isaiah said this? Well, the Babylonians came in and conquered them, ended the Davidic kingship. There was no more kings of Israel or Judah that were descended from David, and there wasn't another claimant to that throne until Jesus came along and said, "Oh, I'm the king." So that prophecy did not come true. 9:7 says that it will be from this time onward and forevermore, and obviously it's not true. So you kind of have to gloss over that. So there are pages and pages of prophecy in the Old Testament. You can pick and choose verses to show whatever you want. And there's a quote here from a book that I enjoyed very much, A History of the Bible. It says, the prophetic books, like the pieces of which they are composed, are for the most part subversive entities, undercutting the foundations of established religion, especially the state religious cults of the Hebrew kingdoms in pre-exile times, and the political machinations of the times just before the exile. So what he's saying is the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, had these temples. They had King Josiah tried to focus all the religious worship in Jerusalem, but there were still people who were worshiping all over the place, and they were engaging in animal sacrifice. That was the main thing that they did. You know, if you had a sin, you sacrificed the requisite number of animals, and then your sin was forgiven, expiated. And so that was the established religion. And the prophets come along and say that is not what is important. That is not a good thing. You need to be kind to the widows and orphans. You need to stop accumulating wealth. The prophets were very anti-wealthy people, and they said, and judgment's coming. Y'all are going to pay the price. Yes, Charlie.
So these are dissidents.
Yep.
There's an established church.
Yep.
There's the king who's controlling religion.
Uh-huh.
And these are the dissidents who are essentially then threatening treason and should be suppressed by the king, right?
Yeah, well, that's why Jeremiah got thrown into a well. The prophets that we remember, the ones that have books named after them in the Bible, were the subversive ones. They were the ones who were saying, this kingdom's going to fall. The worship is going to end. The temple will be destroyed. You need to stop oppressing the widows and orphans and putting people in jail for not paying their debts and that sort of thing. Yeah, Ian.
I kind of think of them as being spiritually focused people who are saying you've got it settled in terms of what's going on in terms of material goods, the things of this world. You kings, you're in charge. That's very good, but you're missing the ultimate point. Is that there's something bigger that you should keep in mind. Being kind, even when it doesn't pay off. And Jesus is very much in this
Render unto Caesar what is Caesar and accommodate yourself to the political power, but
Right.
I'm listening to Martin's description of these people, and I'm sensing these are social justice warriors. These are like Latin priests in Central America.
Yeah.
If you ever watch, there's a great mini-series called The Ascent of Man. It's ancient now, but Jan Bronowski talks about progression, and it's a movie about the ascent of human capacity, or the evolution of human capacity, and he puts Jesus, there's an episode on Jesus as the spiritual leader, the thought leader of his time, because he was willing to propound these ideas, and he draws that continuum to the scientists of today, the great scientists of today, who are saying there's more out there than you guys have thought about so far.
Yeah. So an example would be from Isaiah.
And the authoritarian response is always stop asking questions.
So from
Do what I say.
700 years before Jesus, Isaiah said, "Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field until there's room for no one, and you are left to live alone in the midst of the land." I mean, that sounds like the housing crisis, doesn't it?
Somebody needs to send a copy of that to Elon Musk.
Yeah. And he says, woe to those who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of their rights. I mean, nothing's really changed, has it, in 2,700 years? We still have people joining house to house and acquitting the guilty for a bribe.
Gisela Maxwell.
Yeah, yeah. Pretty amazing. All right, any other questions? Yeah, Amy.
When you sacrificed an animal, did that mean you didn't eat it?
It depends. There were burnt sacrifices where the whole animal was consumed by fire, but most of the time the priest got to eat it.
Oh, the priest got to eat it.
That's how they made their living. There wasn't a money economy. I mean, there was money, but it wasn't in widespread use. People lived a little bit differently back then. Yeah.
Somebody pointed out to me once, we still carry that tradition when we have barbecues on holidays.
Barbecues and holidays. Yeah, that's a fair point, and you should always invite your minister to the barbecue. Well, no, think about, as late as my grandparents' time and my parents' childhood, the minister kind of went from house to house, and people among his parish, the parishioners, fed the minister, at least on Sundays. The minister showed up. And Catholic churches continued as well into the 20th century, where you were it was a great honor if the priest came and visited your house and stayed for dinner, and so that was how that supplemented their income, because they weren't paid a lot. Yeah.
So just to expand on a couple of points that you made earlier vis-a-vis Jesus. One thing you said is that prophets often weren't honored in their own town. I think that there's a
Jesus
New
says
Testament reference about how Jesus had to kind of skedaddle out of Nazareth because everybody there just knew him as a regular guy.
Right.
And he wasn't recognized as being divine until he
Right.
left.
And in fact, they called him the son of Mary in the Gospel according to Mark. And in a patriarchal society, to be the son of a woman was degrading.
Yeah.
It implied that his mother was unmarried.
Yeah. So, and then the second point, in terms of kind of the time frame of most of these prophecies, I think it's commonplace these days for a lot of Christians, particularly evangelical Christians, to think that the second coming is due about now.
Right.
The early Christians expected Jesus' second coming to be within their lifetimes.
The very earliest, I mean, Paul writes as if it's coming, any day now. don't change your situation. If you're married, stay married. If you're unmarried, don't get married. If you have to, you can get married. But he was kind of down on the whole marriage thing, and because he was expecting it within the lifetime of Jesus' followers, which is what Jesus said was going to happen. But not that long afterwards, say after the year 100 in Common Era, you get people who say this is all symbolic, and if you live as if the world is coming to an end, then how would that affect your moral stance? How would it affect what you do on a day-to-day basis if you thought the world was coming to an end? Regardless of whether the world is coming to an end, which is something we can't know because it's out of our control, how would that change how you live? And so the symbolic interpretations arise very early in Christianity, in the 100s. And people like Irenaeus are writing about the literal interpretation is the lowest level of interpretation, and then you move up through successively higher spiritual interpretations of all of these prophecies, so that you don't have to say, well, is this a sign? Is this Gog and Magog? Is this, all this stuff? Yeah.
It's one of the apostles, and I think it's Paul. I can't recall the citation, but says very explicitly, we cannot foretell the end of time.
Right.
Those who tell you that they can are lying to you.
Mm-hmm.
And the point, in effect, is to always live as if it's today or tomorrow. And that's very clarifying of your priorities and values.
Right.
If you live that way. It's really quite Zen, part of the New Testament.
Well, right.
Surprisingly so.
Yeah, and a lot of people have kind of come up with that idea independently, because you don't know how long your days are.
Right, but this is one of the apostles.
Yeah, no, it's in the New Testament
that,
for sure.
Yeah.
I can't recall the quotation and where that's from either, but it is definitely. And there's some parables of Jesus that say you don't really know.
So you probably can't see because of the screen, but I think you had a question.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm really new. This is actually my first study.
Yeah, glad you're here.
Is there any prophets in the Old Testament versus the New Testament?
Yeah, most of the prophets that we've been talking about are in the Old Testament.
Oh, so we've been talking about the Old Testament?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry for the very naive.
No, that's fine. Maybe you didn't get the handout. You know what? I was going to put a list of the prophets on the handout, and then I didn't. Sorry about that. I probably should have, because that was the part where I was talking about all these people from like the 850 BCE through 450 BCE. We don't really know when some of these people actually prophesied, but the Bible the Protestant Bible is divided into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament was all written pretty much by the 500s BCE. So then there's a 5-century gap, and you get the events of Jesus' life, which caused the New Testament to be written.
Okay.
So
I got it blurred together because I was
Yeah.
understanding that the Old Testament was more like Genesis and.
It starts there. Genesis is the first book of the Bible.
So among Jews, is it a continuing tradition to recognize some as prophets?
Yes, yeah, they do. But again, like I said, the Jewish tradition, the rabbinic tradition, which is what most Jews practice today, it treats the prophets as secondary to the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Okay.
So they're basically treated as almost like a commentary on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses. Those all mean the same thing. Okay.
And in Christianity?
In Christianity, because of the emphasis on Jesus as fulfilling the prophets, they were reinterpreted not as being prophecies about the time that they were made, but as about a future time. Despite what I read to you about Ezekiel specifically saying, I'm prophesying about right now, the early Christians interpreted them as being about their times.
Okay, so
And have
we don't.
continued to do so.
Yeah, that's
we
right.
don't-
All right, anybody else? Well, thank you. Yeah, Amy.
I didn't grow up Christian, but the only reason why I was interested in the Bible was this predictions of the end of the world. And it was supposed to start in the Middle East, and
Right.
it sounded like we were going to nuclear bomb each other, But I was kind of surprised when you said, no, it's not. You said it wasn't.
No, I mean, the prophets weren't prophesying for centuries after their time. Nobody was interested in fact, in the future centuries. In fact, people in the prophets' time said, what are you talking about? Is this some distant day? And they were like, no, I'm prophesying about right now. And so, you know, you've got the prophesying words saying, this is about what's about to happen, not about distant days.
You might be thinking also specifically about the book of Revelation, which
Yeah.
is a very specific can of worms,
Yeah,
and to be viewed slightly apart from the other prophets.
right. All right, well, I don't want anybody to be late to the service, so thank you all for coming.
Thank you.